They used my college fund to bail him out. I'm still paying student loans. Part 1. My name is Hannah Wilson, and I discovered my college fund had vanished 3 weeks before my high school graduation. While my classmates were celebrating acceptance letters and planning dorm decorations, I was standing in my parents' kitchen, staring at my father's guilty expression as he explained that the money that had been promised to me since childhood, nearly $60,000 saved over 18 years, had been used to bail my older brother out of his third failed business venture. "We had no choice, Hannah," my father said, hands spread in that placating gesture I'd come to recognize whenever he was trying to minimize something significant. Jason was going to lose everything. His house, his car. They were threatening legal action. He has the twins to think about. Today, 8 years later, I'm still paying off the student loans that financed the education my parents had promised would be debt-free. Meanwhile, my brother Jason lives in a house more expensive than the one he almost lost, drives a newer model luxury car, and has just launched his fourth business venture, this one bankrolled by our parents' retirement fund. The twins, my niece and nephew who were the emotional leverage for sacrificing my future, barely know me because I can't afford to visit more than once a year on my teacher's salary after the student loan payments are deducted. Before I share how this betrayal shaped the course of my entire adult life, drop a like and subscribe to hear how one woman's journey through financial abandonment by her own family led to unexpected strength and the ultimate decision about forgiveness that shocked everyone at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. Growing up in the Wilson household in Naperville, Illinois meant understanding that our family operated on clear, if unspoken, gender expectations. My father, Richard Wilson, built a moderately successful insurance agency that provided our upper-middle-class lifestyle, while my mother, Diane, managed the household and volunteered extensively at church and community organizations. They weren't explicitly traditional in their stated values. Both encouraged me to pursue education and career goals, but their actions revealed deeper biases that became increasingly apparent as my brother and I grew older. Jason, 4 years my senior, was groomed from childhood to be a businessman like our father. His academic struggles were dismissed as evidence that he was too creative or too much of a big-picture thinker for conventional education. His C-average grades were never cause for concern, while my occasional B+ would trigger concerned conversations about whether I was applying myself fully. Where my achievements were expected, his were celebrated extravagantly. "Your brother just sees the world differently," my mother would explain, when teachers expressed concerns about his academic performance or behavioral issues. "He's going to be very successful someday. He just needs to find the right outlet for his talents." This unwavering belief in Jason's future success, despite mounting evidence to the contrary, shaped our family dynamic in ways that became increasingly problematic as we entered adulthood. While I dutifully followed the prescribed path, honor roll, extracurricular leadership positions, volunteer work that would strengthen my college applications, Jason drifted through community college before dropping out to pursue his first entrepreneurial venture, a sports memorabilia shop that failed within my 8 months. The pattern was established during that first business failure when I was 15. Jason, then 20, had convinced our parents to co-sign the lease on a retail space and loan him startup capital that was supposed to be repaid within the first year. When the business collapsed under the weight of his poor management and impulsive inventory decisions, our parents absorbed the debt without requiring any accountability or repayment plan. "He took a risk," my father said proudly, as if losing $20,000 of family money was somehow admirable. That's what entrepreneurs do. Most successful business people fail multiple times before making it big. This narrative, that Jason's failures were actually stepping stones to inevitable future success, became the family gospel. Each subsequent business attempt followed the same pattern: initial enthusiasm and family financial support, followed by mismanagement, followed by parental bailout, followed by immediate planning for the next venture with no pause for reflection or learning. Through it all, my academic achievements were acknowledged but undervalued, treated as the expected path that offered less excitement and potential than Jason's perpetual quest for entrepreneurial success. When I received a partial scholarship to Northwestern University, my parents seemed more interested in Jason's latest business idea, a food truck concept that would ultimately become his second failure, than in celebrating my accomplishment. "Of course you got a scholarship," my mother said, as if admission to a prestigious university with financial support was somehow less impressive than Jason's concept for selling gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches from a renovated Airstream trailer. You've always been good at school. The different standards applied to our life choices became increasingly apparent as we entered our 20s. When I chose to pursue education as my major, with plans to become a high school English teacher, my parents expressed concern about the financial practicality of my decision. "Teachers don't make very much money, Hannah," my father cautioned during my sophomore year. "Are you sure you don't want to consider something with more earning potential? Business, perhaps? Or law?" The irony that they were questioning the financial wisdom of my stable career choice while simultaneously funding Jason's third failing business venture, an apparel company selling overpriced fitness clothing, was apparently lost on them. They worried about my ability to support myself on a teacher's salary, but never seemed to question Jason's ability to support himself when he had yet to demonstrate any sustained earning capacity. Through all of this, the one constant reassurance was my college fund. From my earliest memories, my parents had emphasized the importance of the account they had established when I was born, making regular contributions to ensure I could graduate without the burden of student loans. It was discussed at dinner tables, mentioned in proud conversations with family friends, referenced whenever financial decisions were being made for the household. "We can't take that vacation this year," my father would say. "We're prioritizing your college fund. Education is the best investment we can make in your future." The existence of this fund shaped my college selection process and career planning. I chose Northwestern, despite receiving full scholarship offers from less prestigious schools, because my parents assured me the combination of my partial scholarship and the college fund would cover the costs completely. I selected education as my major, despite its limited earning potential, because I believed I was starting adult life without the burden of student debt. That illusion shattered entirely 3 weeks before high school graduation, as I stood in our kitchen holding my final tuition statement from Northwestern and asked my parents about accessing the college fund for the first payment due in June. The uncomfortable silence that followed my question told me everything before they said a word. My father cleared his throat. My mother suddenly became very interested in the dish towel she was holding, and the air in the room seemed to thicken with unspoken truth. "About that," my father finally said, not quite meeting my eyes. "There's been a situation with the college fund." The situation, as it turned out, was that 6 months earlier, Jason's fitness apparel company had collapsed under massive debt. Suppliers were threatening legal action. He had missed 3 mortgage payments, and his credit was already destroyed from his previous business failures. Rather than allowing him to face the consequences of his mismanagement, my parents had withdrawn the entirety of my college fund to pay off his business debts, cover his mortgage arrears, and provide additional capital for him to stabilize his financial situation. "We always intended to replace it," my mother added quickly, seeing the shock on my face. "Jason was supposed to pay it back before you needed it for tuition. He just needs more time than we expected." The casual way they delivered this life-altering news, as if they had borrowed a sweater without asking rather than decimated my educational future, left me speechless. They had made this decision without consulting me, without warning me, leaving me no time to apply for additional scholarships or reconsider my college choice based on the new financial reality. "So, what am I supposed to do now?" I finally managed to ask, my voice tight with controlled emotion. "Northwestern is expecting payment in 3 weeks." My parents exchanged the uncomfortable glance I'd come to recognize when they were about to suggest something they knew was inadequate. "Student loans are an option," my father said carefully. "Many students use them, and we can help a little each semester. Not as much as we planned, but something." "This is temporary," my mother added with forced brightness. "Once Jason's new venture takes off, he'll repay everything. This could be resolved by your sophomore or junior year." The new venture she referenced was already in planning stages, a premium subscription box service for pet owners that would ultimately become Jason's 3rd consecutive business failure. The money would never be repaid, the situation would never be resolved, and the promise that this betrayal was somehow temporary would prove to be yet another fiction designed to manage my reaction, rather than address the fundamental inequity of their decision. I didn't shout or cry or storm out of the kitchen, though all of those responses would have been justified. Instead, I felt something shift fundamentally in my understanding of my place in the family system. The message was unmistakable. Jason's wants would always take precedence over my needs. His failures would always be more worthy of financial support than my successes. Their belief in his potential would always outweigh their commitment to my actual achievements. "I see," I said finally, folding the tuition statement and placing it back in its envelope with hands that had gone strangely steady. "I'll figure it out myself." Those 5 words, "I'll figure it out myself," became the guiding philosophy for my adult life. Over the next 8 years, I would indeed figure it out myself, without the support I had been promised and had every right to expect. I spent that night researching student loan options, calculating interest rates, and revising my entire financial future based on the reality that I would be graduating with significant debt. The following day, I approached my high school counselor for emergency guidance on additional scholarship opportunities, though I knew it was far too late in the process to secure significant funding. In the end, I cobbled together a financial package that allowed me to attend Northwestern as planned, a combination of my existing partial scholarship, federal student loans at the lowest available interest rate, a campus job that would provide spending money, and approximately $5,000 per year that my parents could contribute from their current income, less than half of what they had promised, but better than nothing. My parents seemed almost relieved by how, practically, I handled the situation, as if my lack of emotional breakdown was confirmation that their decision hadn't been as devastating as it actually was. They didn't see the nights I spent crying in my bedroom, the panic attacks I experienced when calculating my future debt burden, or the profound sense of betrayal that colored every interaction with them from that point forward. Jason, for his part, appeared completely unaware of the sacrifice that had been made on his behalf. When I saw him at my graduation party, he enthusiastically described his new business concept, without once mentioning the college fund that had been diverted to save him from the consequences of his previous failure. Whether my parents had shielded him from this knowledge or he simply didn't care enough to acknowledge it remained unclear. "You're going to love Northwestern," he told me, as if we were just having a normal conversation about my college plans. College was the best time of my life. I bit back the observation that his 16 months at community college hardly qualified as a complete college experience, especially since it had been fully funded by our parents while I was facing years of loan repayments for my education. Instead, I nodded politely and excused myself to speak with friends who were actually celebrating my achievement rather than centering themselves. The 4 years at Northwestern passed in a blur of academic determination and financial stress. I maintained my scholarship by keeping my GPA above the required threshold, worked 20 hours weekly at the campus library, took summer jobs instead of internships that might have advanced my career but didn't pay enough, and graduated with honors despite the constant pressure of knowing each semester was adding to my debt burden. During those 4 years, Jason launched and crashed his subscription box service, briefly held a sales position that he quit because his boss didn't appreciate his creative input, and began planning his 4th business venture, an app for connecting home chefs with local food enthusiasts that would require significant startup capital for development. Each time I came home for brief visits, the contrast in how our life choices were framed became more apparent. My careful financial management, academic success, and progress toward a stable teaching career were treated as the expected minimum, while Jason's continued unemployment and business failures were discussed with unwavering optimism about his entrepreneurial journey and valuable experience. "Jason's been consulting with a tech incubator about his app idea," my father announced proudly during my junior year Thanksgiving break, as if connecting with yet another entity that might give his son money represented actual achievement. "They're very impressed with his vision." I nodded and asked for the mashed potatoes, swallowing both the food and the observation that vision seemed to be the only thing my brother had ever consistently produced. Results, responsibility, and repayment of debts, especially to me, were conspicuously absent from his entrepreneurial repertoire. By the time I graduated from Northwestern, I had secured a teaching position at a public high school in Chicago. The salary was modest but stable, the benefits were good, and I found genuine fulfillment in working with my students. Under different circumstances, without the burden of student loans, it would have been an ideal first job that allowed me to build my career while enjoying the energy and culture of Chicago. Instead, after rent for my tiny shared apartment, loan payments, and basic living expenses, I had less than $100 of discretionary income each month. While former classmates were traveling during summer breaks, building savings accounts, or considering graduate programs, I was picking up summer school teaching assignments and weekend tutoring gigs to stay financially afloat. The most painful aspect wasn't the financial struggle itself, Many of my peers faced similar challenges, but the knowledge that it had been unnecessary, the result not of unavoidable circumstances, but of my parents' conscious choice to prioritize my brother's needs over the commitment they had made to me. This reality became even more bitter 6 months after my college graduation, when I received a phone call from my mother bursting with excitement about Jason's big break. "The app developers love Jason's concept," she gushed. "They're ready to start building the platform. Isn't that wonderful news?" "That's great," I replied automatically. "How is he financing the development?" The slight pause told me everything before she answered. "Well, your father and I are helping with the initial investment. We really believe this is the one that's going to take off." Later that evening, my father called to clarify what my mother had shared, explaining that they had made the difficult but necessary decision to use a portion of their retirement savings to fund Jason's app development. The amount, $70,000, was even more than they had originally saved for my college education before diverting it to Jason's previous failure. "We've done the research this time," he assured me, as if the problem with their previous investments in Jason's ventures had been insufficient due diligence rather than his fundamental lack of business acumen or work ethic. "The market for this kind of service is growing exponentially." I listened silently, mentally calculating how that $70,000 could have covered my entire education with money left over, how it could now pay off my remaining student loans with enough remaining to provide a down payment on a small condo, how many hours of teaching and tutoring I would need to work to earn that amount after taxes. "That's a significant investment," I finally said, keeping my voice neutral. "I hope it works out this time." "This time feels different," my father insisted, either missing or ignoring the implications of my response. "Jason has really matured. He's approaching this much more professionally." The maturity and professionalism my father referenced were nowhere evident 6 months later when the app development stalled due to Jason's constant changes to the concept, or 8 months after that, when the partially completed platform was abandoned, because a similar service launched by actual tech professionals had captured the market Jason had been too slow to enter. The $70,000 from my parents' retirement fund disappeared just as completely as my college fund had, with nothing to show for it except some incomplete code and Jason's rapid pivot to his next venture idea, a specialty coffee shop concept that would somehow differentiate itself in Chicago's already saturated market. Through all of this, I continued teaching, paying my loans, and creating increasing emotional distance between myself and my family. I called less frequently, visited only when absolutely necessary, and shared less of my actual life during those interactions. The relationship had become transactional and superficial. Holiday appearances, birthday acknowledgments, and carefully filtered updates that revealed little about my genuine experiences or feelings. My parents occasionally expressed concern about this growing distance, wondering aloud why I couldn't visit more often, or why I seemed reserved during family gatherings. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. They seemed genuinely unable to connect their ongoing preferential treatment of Jason with my withdrawal from family engagement. "We miss you," my mother would say during our increasingly brief phone conversations. "Can't you try to come home more than just at Christmas? Jason brings the twins over every Sunday for dinner." The unspoken reality that Jason could afford these weekly visits because he had never had to repay the money that should have funded my education, that my work schedule included weekend tutoring to cover loan payments, that the drive from Chicago to Naperville represented gas money I needed to budget carefully, remained unacknowledged. The situation reached a breaking point during my 3rd year of teaching, when a series of events forced a confrontation I had been avoiding since graduation. First, I received notice that my student loan interest rates were increasing, adding nearly $100 to my monthly payments. The same week, the radiator in my 10-year-old car failed, requiring an emergency repair that depleted my modest savings. Then my roommate announced she was moving in with her boyfriend, leaving me to either find a new roommate or somehow afford the apartment alone. The cumulative stress of these challenges coincided with a call from my mother, bubbling with news about my parents' decision to invest in Jason's coffee shop concept. They had taken out a home equity line of credit, using the house I had grown up in as collateral, to provide the startup capital for his 5th business attempt. "He's found the perfect location," my mother explained excitedly. "It needs some renovation, but the potential is amazing. And he's taking business management classes at the community college this time, so he's really committed to doing things right. Something in me snapped at the contrast between my careful financial management, professional dedication, and continued struggle, compared to the endless resources and support flowing toward my brother, despite his consistent history of failure and irresponsibility. "Mom," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "Has Jason ever repaid any of the money you and Dad have given him over the years, including my college fund?" The silence that followed confirmed what I already knew. My mother's eventual response was defensive and dismissive. "That's not really how family support works, Hannah. We don't keep score like that. We help both our children according to their needs." "My need was the college education you promised to fund," I replied, the words flowing now that I had finally begun. "My need is not having $60,000 of student debt for an education you said would be covered. My need is parents who keep their promises and who value my hard work and responsibility, at least as much as they value Jason's endless potential." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We're proud of you too. You've always been the capable one, the independent one. Jason needs more support." "He doesn't need it," I corrected her. "He's been conditioned to expect it. There's a difference." The conversation deteriorated from there, with my mother becoming increasingly defensive and eventually passing the phone to my father, who attempted to use his reasonable voice to explain once again how different Jason and I were, how my academic aptitude and responsibility made me better equipped for independence, how supporting Jason's entrepreneurial efforts was an investment in his future success. "When the coffee shop takes off, he'll be able to repay everything," my father insisted, "including your college fund, like the sports memorabilia store was going to take off, or the food truck, or the apparel company, or the app," I countered. "At what point do you recognize the pattern and stop enabling his failures at my expense?" The conversation ended without resolution, my parents unwilling or unable to acknowledge the fundamental inequity of their choices, or the lasting impact those choices had on my life and our relationship. I hung up feeling both drained and somehow lighter, as if finally articulating the truth had lifted a weight I had been carrying since that day in the kitchen before my high school graduation. The following weekend, instead of picking up extra tutoring hours as planned, I drove to Naperville unannounced. I needed to have this conversation in person, to look my parents in the eyes as they explained their choices, to make them see me as the adult woman their decisions had shaped, rather than the compliant daughter who had accepted their betrayal without sufficient protest. When I arrived at the family home, I found not just my parents, but Jason as well, spread across the dining room table with coffee shop floor plans, equipment catalogs, and financial projections that bore little relationship to any realistic business outcome based on his track record. They seemed genuinely surprised to see me, my mother rising from her chair with concern etched on her face. "Hannah, is everything okay? We weren't expecting you." "No," I said simply, setting my purse on the entryway table with deliberate calm. "Everything is not okay, and we need to talk about why." What followed was the most honest conversation our family had ever experienced, one that forced each of us to confront truths that had been carefully avoided for years. I laid out the financial reality of my post-college life, the exact amount of my monthly loan payments, the interest accumulated, the additional jobs I worked to stay afloat, the opportunities I had been forced to decline due to financial constraints. I described the psychological impact of discovering that promises made throughout my childhood could be broken without consequence, that my academic achievements and responsible choices were rewarded with financial abandonment, while my brother's failures were met with endless financial support and unwavering optimism. "I'm not here to ask for money," I clarified, seeing my father's expression shift toward the problem-solving mode that typically involved writing checks. "I'm here because I need you to understand what your choices have cost me, not just financially, but in terms of trust, security, and my relationship with this family." My parents' responses were predictable: discomfort, defensiveness, attempts to minimize the impact of their decisions, insistence that they had done their best with difficult choices. What surprised me was Jason's reaction. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he seemed to be truly seeing the consequences of his behavior and the preferential treatment he had received. "I didn't know," he said quietly, interrupting our father's explanation about family resources and different needs. "I mean, I knew they helped with your college when my business was in trouble, but I didn't know it was your entire fund. I didn't know you were still paying loans." The genuine shock in his expression suggested that our parents had indeed shielded him from the full reality of how their support for his ventures had affected my educational funding. This didn't absolve him of responsibility. A 30-year-old man should have asked questions about where repeated business bailouts were coming from, but it contextualized his apparent indifference to my situation. "They've given me over $200,000 across all my business attempts," he continued, looking from our parents to me with growing realization, plus co-signing leases, covering my mortgage during rough periods, paying for consultants. I never added it all up before. My father looked uncomfortable with this accounting. "That's not exactly—" "Yes, it is," Jason interrupted, showing uncharacteristic awareness. "It's at least that much. Probably more." A heavy silence filled the dining room, as the scale of the inequity hung in the air between us. My mother was the first to speak, her voice uncharacteristically small. "We never meant to hurt you, Hannah. We just thought Jason needed the help more urgently. Your education could be funded other ways. His business debts couldn't." "That's the problem," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You decided his emergencies were more important than my future. His poor choices outweighed your promises to me, and you made that decision without even discussing it with me, without giving me time to make alternative plans." My father shook his head, still resistant to accepting the fundamental injustice of their actions. "It wasn't preferential treatment. It was responding to different situations with different solutions." "Dad," Jason said suddenly, surprising all of us. "It was preferential treatment. Let's just be honest about that." The admission from the primary beneficiary of that preferential treatment seemed to land with my parents in a way that my protests never had. They exchanged a glance that contained decades of shared parenting decisions, unspoken biases, and perhaps the first acknowledgement that those decisions had created lasting damage they had never intended. The conversation continued for hours, moving from the dining room to the living room as afternoon became evening. There were moments of genuine connection and painful honesty, defensive retreats and cautious steps toward understanding. No single conversation could resolve years of family dynamic patterns, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that something had been broken and needed attention rather than continued avoidance. By the time I prepared to drive back to Chicago that evening, several things had become clear. My parents were not going to suddenly recognize the full extent of their preferential treatment or make immediate amends for the financial inequity. Deeply ingrained patterns of family functioning don't dissolve in a single conversation, no matter how honest. But something had shifted. Jason had volunteered to delay the coffee shop venture, suggesting that perhaps the home equity funds might better be used to repay at least a portion of my student loans before launching another business attempt. My parents hadn't immediately agreed, but they hadn't immediately dismissed the idea either, a significant change from their previous unwavering support of his ventures, regardless of impact on the wider family. As I hugged my brother goodbye, the first genuine embrace we had shared in years, he whispered, "I'm going to make this right. Maybe not all at once, but I will." I didn't fully believe him. His track record with financial promises was not encouraging, but I appreciated the sentiment and the new awareness it represented. As for my parents, our goodbye was more reserved, the weight of unresolved issues still hanging between us. But my mother held my hand a moment longer than usual, searching my face with new understanding. "We'll talk more about this," she promised. "Really talk, not just avoid." Driving back to Chicago that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for years. Cautious hope. Not that everything would be immediately resolved, or that the financial damage could be quickly undone, but that perhaps we could build a more honest relationship moving forward, one based on genuine recognition, rather than convenient fictions about our family dynamic. The following months brought small but meaningful changes. My parents began calling more often, asking genuine questions about my teaching work and financial situation, rather than offering superficial conversations that avoided uncomfortable realities. Jason took a full-time job with a marketing firm, his first stable employment in years, and suspended plans for the coffee shop indefinitely. 3 months after our confrontation, I received an unexpected check from my parents for $10,000. Not the full amount of my college fund, but a significant step toward acknowledging the debt. The accompanying note was simple. "This is just a start. We're committed to making this right over time." The money went directly to my highest interest student loan, reducing both the principal and my monthly payment obligation. The financial relief was welcome, but the acknowledgement behind it, The recognition that a wrong had been committed and needed to be addressed was even more significant for my emotional well-being and our family relationship. Jason, too, began making monthly contributions toward my loans, modest amounts that reflected his entry-level salary, but represented a consistent commitment to addressing the inequity. More importantly, he stopped expecting or accepting additional financial support from our parents, taking responsibility for his own housing, transportation, and living expenses for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Today, 4 years after that confrontation, my relationship with my family has evolved into something I never thought possible during those bitter years of financial struggle and emotional distance. My student loans aren't fully repaid yet, but the burden has been significantly reduced through consistent contributions from both my parents and Jason. More importantly, the preferential treatment that defined our family dynamic for decades has been acknowledged, discussed, and gradually adjusted toward greater equity. Jason has maintained stable employment, advanced in his marketing career, and recently launched a small side business, one funded entirely through his own savings and managed with the caution and discipline his previous ventures lacked. He still has entrepreneurial dreams, but he's pursuing them responsibly, rather than expecting family bailouts for impulsive decisions. My parents have done their own difficult work, examining the gender expectations and biases that influence their parenting choices and financial decisions. The process hasn't been linear or perfect, but their willingness to acknowledge these patterns has allowed us to build a more authentic relationship than we've ever had before. As for me, I've advanced in my teaching career, completed a master's degree in education, with partial tuition assistance from my parents that felt like restoration rather than charity, and recently purchased my first small condo in Chicago. The financial setback of my diverted college fund has not been fully overcome. I'm still years behind where I might have been without that burden, but the healing in our family relationships has provided a different kind of wealth I hadn't expected to find. Last Thanksgiving, sitting around the dining room table where our confrontation had occurred 4 years earlier, my father raised his glass in an unexpected toast. "To Hannah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who had the courage to tell us some difficult truths we needed to hear, and to family healing that comes from facing those truths together, however uncomfortable they might be." The moment wasn't dramatic or tearful. We had moved beyond the raw emotions of earlier conversations to something more measured and sustainable. But as I looked around at my parents and brother, I realized how far we had come from the family dynamic that had once seemed immutable. The journey from betrayal to repair has taught me that family patterns can change, even long-established ones, when we're willing to name them honestly and commit to different choices. It's shown me that financial inequities between siblings aren't just about money. They're about recognition, respect, and the messages we absorb about our worth within the family system. Most importantly, it's revealed that confronting painful truths, while initially destabilizing, creates the possibility for authentic relationships that weren't possible when built on convenient fictions and unacknowledged preferences. If you're facing similar family financial inequities, college funds that disappeared, inheritances that were distributed unevenly, support that flows towards certain siblings while others struggle alone, know that your feelings of hurt and betrayal are valid. The impact of these disparities extends far beyond the financial reality to shape how you view yourself, your family, and your place within it. But also know that patterns can change, awareness can grow, and relationships can heal when truth is valued above comfortable pretense. The conversation that begins with "this isn't fair" might eventually lead to understanding you never thought possible with family members you had written off as incapable of change. The college fund that was used to bail out my brother can never be fully restored. Those years of financial struggle and their impact on my early adulthood can't be erased. But the family relationships that seemed permanently damaged by that betrayal have been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty, accountability, and genuine care that might never have developed without the painful reckoning that forced us all to see each other more clearly. Sometimes the financial inequities that divide families can ultimately become the catalyst for deeper connection, if we have the courage to name them, the persistence to address them, and the compassion to recognize that healing happens gradually, through consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures or simple apologies. I'm still paying student loans for an education that should have been debt-free, but I'm no longer paying the emotional price of unacknowledged family patterns or unexpressed truth. And in the balance of what matters most for lifelong well-being, That transformation has made all the difference.